Okay, well, welcome everyone, and thank you to Eric for inviting me to this wonderful storytelling festival. I am not a storyteller. This is brand new to me. So in my workshop, I hope that there's things that you will learn, and I am really looking forward to getting feedback and learning from you. And I have some slides that Eric is going to be showing. I can't see them for now, but Eric, I'll let you know when it's time to put the slides on, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so the talk is entitled Mahatma Gandhi, Henry David Thoreau, and the Discovery of Connections. And only about 2 weeks ago, I learned the term braided stories. And I love that term because you can learn a lot and tell interesting things about a particular person. But to me, what's really interesting is how those stories weave with and intersect with other people. Okay. Now, what I found is, particularly in the first story that I'm going to tell you, what I'm calling these invisible lines of connection that connect across time, both people and places. And the setting is very important here because I am a retired teacher, a high school math teacher from the town of Concord, Massachusetts. And Concord is a very special town. It has a lot of history, and it's history that I didn't know until I moved from New England. I'm originally from Chicago. Now, Eric, I don't see the slides. I
Shall
can
I put
only
the slides
see.
up now?
Um, yeah, if you'd like, you can start with the first slide.
Okay.
Um, So I'm going to be telling you two different stories. One is a story that was composed for adults, and it was given at a professional conference. The second is a story that is a children's story, and they probably seem completely different. But I see the connections between those two stories, and I'm curious to hear from you what other connections you might see. Okay, so I'm going to start out with a little bit of how I transformed or evolved from a high school math teacher to learning to become a storyteller. And the story really starts with I was visiting my son in and daughter-in-law in Victoria, and I was going through my emails, and I saw one from the Thoreau Society. And it was a call for papers to give presentations. And the theme was revolutions, Thoreau and revolutions. And my son said to me, why don't you submit something? And I thought, what? I don't really know much about Thoreau and revolutions, and I'm certainly not a Thoreau scholar. And he said something to the effect of, well, I'm sure you can come up with something. Why don't you try? And I thought, okay. I'm newly retired and I'm interested in storytelling, so I'm going to try and write something together, but it has to be something that's meaningful to me. So this is a story that involves Thoreau, Gandhi, but is personal to me. So if you can go to the next slide, Eric. Okay, so I want people to take a minute and just think about what you know about Mahatma Gandhi. And obviously, if there's people here from India, they know a lot more than people from the US or other countries. So I'm going to give you a minute to sort of think about that. You can write stuff down or just hold it in your mind. Okay, now can you go to the next slide, Eric, please? Eric, the next slide, please. Well, I don't know if Eric can hear me. The next slide is Henry David Thoreau, and I wanted you to think about what you know about Henry David Thoreau. Now, those of us in the United States probably know more about Thoreau than we do about Gandhi. But it wasn't until I moved to Massachusetts, specifically Concord, that I really learned a lot about Thoreau. Now, Eric, I can't see the other participants, so do you need to switch from slide to a different view?
Just a moment. Stop share. Uh, okay, now you can see some of the participants, but
Mm,
in these workshops, most of the people tend to keep their cameras turned
yeah.
off.
Oh, okay. So maybe go back to the view of the slides then.
Okay, share.
And the next one is Thoreau. So I'm going to give you another minute on that. And I guess maybe we can have people type into the chat. Do you think that would work better? Hmm. Well, I can't see I can't see anyone. Eric, maybe you can. If you wanted to call on people and ask them to
Uh,
share sort of what they know about Thoreau or Gandhi.
Nobody's raising their hands at the moment, and somebody has written in the chat section that Gandhi was a freedom fighter and a pacifist, a family man. He mobilized people. He was rooted in spirituality. Thoreau retreated to a forest and lived in a cabin.
Okay, all good. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Gandhi, a little bit about Thoreau, and then weave it together with my personal experience. And this is based on a professional presentation that I gave at Thoreau Society. And I will be often interrupting myself. And so you can feel free to, and Eric is going to moderate this, to either put things in the chat or raise your hand or something. And Eric, I'm going to let you be the point person since I can't see anyone.
Okay, someone has added in the chat that Gandhi led nonviolent protests for liberty and equality. Thoreau
Hmm.
reflected on what is essential in life. He was a transcendentalist
Yes,
and he studied
yes.
Eastern philosophies.
Yes, and actually, Eric, his fellow transcendentalist was Ralph Waldo Emerson, another eminent philosopher and author that also lived in the town of Concord.
Okay,
Okay, so I'm gonna talk about what I gave at the presentation, and like I said, Eric, you can feel free to interject and interrupt if there's comments.
okay,
Okay. So this talks about the relationship between Thoreau, Gandhi, and the Indian independence movement. And that's how I tied it into the word revolution, which was the topic of the talk. But this is a personal story for me as well, because as a math teacher, I had the opportunity through Fulbright to teach math in India. So I taught in Delhi, maths, as they called it, the summer of 2008. And to my Kendriya Vidyalaya at Goal Market, I wanted to bring things from my high school in Concord. So I brought yearbooks and t-shirts. I went to the Old North Bridge where the first shot of the American Revolution was fired, a national park in Concord. I went to Emerson's home and Louisa May Alcott's home. She was the author of Little Women, all lived in Concord. And I went to the Thoreau shop at Walden Pond, which is mainly a bookstore. And when I was there, I was talking to the woman at the bookstore and told her that I was going to India. And she said to me, well, of course, you know that Thoreau was strongly influenced by the Bhagavad Gita. Well, not only did I not know that, I had to ask her what the Bhagavad Gita was. So some of you know, probably, maybe some of you don't, but it's a 2,000-year-old Hindu scripture or sacred text that was lent to him by his friend and fellow transcendentalist, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Okay, now if you go to the next slide, Eric.
Now, somebody has written that Thoreau wrote an essay on civil disobedience, which,
Absolutely.
which
Absolutely.
inspired which inspired Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther
Yes.
King.
Yes. Yes.
So
That's right.
when did Thoreau live?
Thoreau, let's see, I think he died 6 or 7 years before Gandhi was born. So I think he died in 1862,
Hmm.
and he was maybe in his 40s. So I think it's 18, 1845. No, I'm not sure, but I do know that he died around 40 years of age, right before the Civil War and shortly before Gandhi was born.
And he
Uh,
wrote an essay which on civil disobedience, which inspired Mahatma Gandhi.
that's right. That's right. So these are the connections that I'm going to talk about. So can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so that's a picture of Thoreau and Emerson at Walden Pond, and of course, a picture of the Bhagavad Gita, which I was given a copy of the Bhagavad Gita by my son, Dan. Okay, so he died in 1862 at age 44. Okay, good. So I was close. Okay, thank you very much. And I think that I have a quote on the next slide. Walden Pond is beautiful, by the way. I encourage everybody to see it if it's all. Oh, no, go back, go back. I'm not ready for the. Yeah, if you could go back down, go back to the previous one. I'll leave it there. So here's a quote, or no, to the next one with Walden Pond. Yeah, leave it there, I think. So here's a quote. I owed My friend and I owed a magnificent day to the Bhagavad Gita. It was the first of books. It was as if an empire spoke to us, the voice of an old intelligence, which in another age and climate had pondered and thus disposed of the same questions which exercise us. And of course, we know that when these words were written, probably around 1850, they're just as true today. Well, voluntary, Thoreau's spiritual retreat of simplicity and voluntary poverty informed his subsequent writings, including two of his probably most famous books. Civil Disobedience which is really called On the Duty of Civil Disobedience, and his other book, Walden, which was a retreat into the woods. And learning that Thoreau had studied the Bhagavad Gita right there at Walden Pond made me feel this strong sense of connection between where I was and that very distant place to where I was going. So shortly after finishing my academic year, I flew to Delhi. And anyone who has been in the US and landed in India will know that all of your senses when you first arrive in India, the sights, the sounds, the aromas, the heat and the humidity and the food are just so almost overwhelming. And the people, I think there were around 20 million people living in the city of Delhi. And when I stepped off the plane and into Delhi, I remember feeling in equal measure both exhilarated and overwhelmed. But I was so excited about seeing my new school, meeting my fellow teachers, and meeting my students. And I wanted to experience absolutely everything I could about India. So when I came to the school, one of the things that I had brought was some T-shirts from our high school, sports T-shirts and whatnot. And there was a program that we had called Be the Change. And when I gave that T-shirt to people at my school, they said, well, you know, Be the Change, that's from our Gandhi. And I said, no, sorry, I didn't know that. And that day after school, instead of going home, even though I was exhausted and jet lagged, I asked my tuk-tuk driver to take me to the Gandhi National Museum because I wanted to learn more about Gandhi. I actually felt a little bit aware of how ignorant I was about this magnificent culture that I had just stepped into. So when I got to the National Gandhi Museum, I walked through the exhibit of original relics and books and photographs. And I learned a lot about detailing Gandhi's formative years. And here's a quote. This is a quote about Gandhi, but if you didn't know, you would think it's a quote about Thoreau. His connection to nature is deeply ingrained in his philosophy and lifestyle, rooted in principles of simplicity, nonviolence, and reverence for all life. He saw a harmonious relationship between humanity and nature, emphasizing the importance of respecting and conserving natural resources while minimizing human greed. And to me, that's exactly Thoreau, Thoreau and Gandhi.
Now,
Well, as
oh,
yeah,
can I interrupt?
uh-huh.
I may be jumping ahead of things, but in relation to what was Thoreau interested in civil disobedience? Were there particular government policies that he was objecting to?
Yeah, well, I'm not an expert on this, but he was objecting basically to taxation. There were taxes that he was being asked to pay to support things that he didn't philosophically support.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so as I continued to walk through the museum, now I wish I could convey to you how hot and humid summer in Delhi is. And even the schools and the museum are not air conditioned. It's hard to picture that now that I have 2 feet of snow looking out at my woods. But as I was walking through the museum, I came to an exhibit, and there was the replica of a cabin and two books, Walden and On the Duty of Civil Disobedience. And there was a placard that said, Henry David Thoreau of Concord, Massachusetts, had profoundly influenced the cause of Indian independence. And I really can't convey to you, standing there drenched in sweat in my salwar kameez, half a world away from home, I just felt this profound sense of connection and that I could almost hear the echoes of footsteps of others that had come before him. And it really changed how I felt about being in India. I was still homesick. I still miss my sons, but I felt a connection to home and that I was in a second home, really. Okay, so I want to give you a little bit more of the history between Gandhi and Thoreau. And some of you I know, particularly in India, will know this far better than I do. But Gandhi first read Walden in 1906 when he was working as a civil rights activist in Johannesburg, South Africa. And he first read on the duty of civil disobedience while in a South African prison for the crime of non-violently protesting the discriminatory Asiatic Registration Act, which restricted and controlled the movement of people of Asian descent throughout the Transvaal.
Huh.
Civil disobedience, yeah?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought I heard a comment. So, reading Civil Disobedience really galvanized Gandhi, and he wrote and published a synopsis of Thoreau's argument. And he referred to him as one of the greatest and most moral men that America has ever produced. So, the two of them really were connected to each other. And Gandhi, of course, dreamed of self-rule and wanted to get the British out, to get India out from under the British oppression. And he coined a term, satyagraha. Now, this is a term I had never heard before, and it translates roughly to truth force or holding firmly to truth. And this was his form of nonviolent disobedience. And he was imprisoned multiple times for sedition for his efforts to challenge the status quo. And his most famous act of civil disobedience was the Salt March. So he wanted to defy the British salt monopoly and challenge the legitimacy of British rule in India. And while there were certainly differences in their approaches and their experiences, both Gandhi and Thoreau were known for their uncompromising ethical beliefs and including a willingness to be imprisoned for those beliefs. Gandhi referred to Thoreau as his teacher, and he was moved by Thoreau's quote that prison is where a just man belongs under an unjust government. So I was really surprised to learn the connectedness between Thoreau and Gandhi, and I'm wondering if anyone has comments before I go on. Okay, well, again, I can't see anyone other than Eric. So I'm going to finish with, I think great stories often have three parts. So I'm going to give the third part. First, I talked about Thoreau, then I talked about Gandhi and their connections. The third part, I'm going to talk about ICE, but it's certainly not the ICE that's currently in the United States News, a government agency that is, uh, well, I won't get into the politics, but going after who they perceive to be aliens in this country. But I'm going to talk about the ICE, a different kind of ICE. And I think if you can advance the slides, Eric. Yeah, so this is a beautiful photograph of Walden Pond. And the next slide, yeah, those are the two books I was talking about. And then the next one, okay, and the next one, okay, and then on to the next one. And I think this will give us the view of, oop, I guess one more. Yeah. So this is the kind of ice that I'm talking about. Now, this is something I did not learn until a couple years after I came back, and I was going to a talk. Well, I went to the Concord has its own history museum at the Concord Museum. And then I went to a talk at the Historical Society, and I learned this. Now, during the 19th century in New England, winters were much longer and colder than they are today. This present winter that we just had is was actually typical for winters in the 1850s. And this was the days before refrigeration. And ice from ponds throughout New England became a commodity to be harvested for export. And this was Yankee ingenuity. And they had created a demand for what they called beautiful crystal blocks of Yankee coldness. So the year that he was living at Walden Pond, which was 1845 when he first moved there, he witnessed these blocks of ice being carved with jagged edge saws, then hauled aboard the newly opened Fitchburg Railroad, which runs right along the pond. It had just opened the year before. And the ice was then packed to be transported throughout the world. In fact, the ice from Walden Pond itself was shipped as far as India, crossing the equator twice in its 4-month journey. And what remained, about half, went straight to the British East India Company. Now, this was all new to me, and while Thoreau was living at Walden Pond, the Indian subcontinent was, and for about 100 years had been ruled by the British East India Company, which is a period known as Company Rule. And it was transferred to the Crown in 58 as a result of the 1857 Indian uprising. So several years before Thoreau's death. So this period, then the British Raj continued until the Indian Independence Act of 1847. And I think I have one more picture, Eric. Yeah. Okay, so if you can go back up to the last one, it was just another beautiful shot of Walden Pond. And then I want to end with a quote from Thoreau. So if you can advance to the next slide, please. Okay, so he said, "In the morning, I bathe my intellect in the stupendous philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita. I lay down my book and I go to my well for water. And there I meet the servant of the Brahmin, our buckets, as it were, great together in the same well." And I thought that was such a beautiful quote. And I talked about Indian independence movement and how the political thought and activism of Thoreau, of Gandhi, drew inspiration from Thoreau, from Walden and civil disobedience, and Thoreau in turn being influenced by the Bhagavad Gita. But I told you this talk is about discovering interconnectedness of seemingly disparate things. And it wasn't just the ideas and intellect crossing back and forth across the Atlantic, but the very waters of Walden Pond transported and now intermingling with the sacred waters of the Ganges. So that is my talk. So, Eric, that's it for the slides. And if you could bring it back to where I can see the other people. Okay. So I still can't see. Um, okay, I can see you now. That's better. So I want to give people just a couple minutes to sort of think about the story. And what I want you to think about is, are there figures in your life? They could be heroes and famous people or just people that you know that were influenced by each other and in turn influenced the influence going back and forth. I know I had known a little bit about Gandhi. I had known a little bit about Thoreau, and it wasn't till I started investigating that I learned about all of these connections between them.
I'm going to stop recording for a moment. All right, so you're inviting us to think about prominent cultural figures who have influenced each other?
Yeah, and I can't see who is in the I can't see the participants, so I don't know if people have cameras on or off. And
Yes,
I
about
don't
10
know
of
if
us, about 10 of us have our cameras on. Uh,
okay.
Krithika, did you want to say something? Krithika, did you raise your
Hi,
hand?
yeah.
Yes.
Yes, thanks so much, for this great talk and exploring the connection. I wanted to talk about connection about how J.R.D. Tata met Swami Vivekananda. Two of them were like really big um, visionaries and people who changed India so much. I live in Bangalore, which has IASC. IASC celebrated its open day yesterday, and it was a result of this small, brief encounter on a ship. And incidentally, Swami Vivekananda was going to give his most famous address in Chicago. So he was
Hmm.
going on that, and this is like long, long time ago where it's not as easy as now. So this chance meeting of two visionaries shaped India so much, and
Oh,
especially shaped the history of Bangalore. So I always find it very interesting.
can you say that name again and spell it, please?
Yes, it is J.R.D. Tata and Swami Vivekananda, and he gave the famous Chicago address.
Huh. What year was
Vivekananda,
And
that?
Vivekananda gave the address in Chicago, correct?
yes, yeah.
But what was the import of the meeting between Vivekananda and Mr. Tata in India?
It was, it gave birth to the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. And then it later on gave birth to TIFR, which is another institute in India, which the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and it kind of like propelled the scientific vision of the country and a lot of movement. And then there was Sir Visvesvaraya. He was also a great engineer and visionary as well. So he was able to implement many things that were the and bring a lot of things under Indian control. So bringing manufacturing industries and moving many things out of what was under the British rule to the hands of Indians. So kind of like they all propelled the Indian movement,
Thank you.
especially post independence. Yeah. And this was just a
Hmm.
very chance meeting of two people on a ship. And, it is just like, how they say a spark can produce a fire. So it
Hmm.
was that kind of a story, so which is very interesting.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else, Eric?
This is about if one is aware of how two prominent people have influenced each other. Somebody is mentioning Marie Curie, the scientist who worked with radioactivity, and how she interacted with Eleanor Roosevelt, who was the wife of
Oh.
the president in the 1930s. What
Hmm.
was the disease that Marie Curie helped cure? Does anyone know? Somehow her work with radioactivity led to a vaccine or some sort of medical treatment that helped a
Hmm.
lot of people. And I'm guessing from Laura, I'm guessing you know about how when she brought her work to the attention of Eleanor Roosevelt promoted her medical work probably. Is that correct, Laura?
Yeah, I don't know a lot about it, but I just read that Eleanor Roosevelt spoke at her funeral, so they did cross over. but they were so powerful at the time, both of them in their own ways, making making history. Um, yeah, just an odd connection of knowing each other or knowing each other's work.
And this is a International Global Women's Day, right, Eric?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. So thank you. So other comments, or should I go on to the second story?
I think go on.
Okay, so I mentioned that I'm a retired math teacher, and I decided that I wanted to write stories, and I got involved with a group of adults reading children's literature. And I just love children's stories. And this is not something I had set out to write, but I had an experience um, the summer of 2020, which was COVID. We were all just getting out of lockdown. And I decided that riding my e-bike or driving around, I wanted to explore my local area and go down roads I had never gone down before and just kind of poke around and explore my local area when I was first getting back into the world after COVID. And the first paragraph of this story that I'm going to tell you is factual. The rest is all me sort of turning it into a children's story. But when you hear this story compared to what I had just told you earlier, they might seem completely different, but I see underlying themes, and I'm curious if other people see different ones. Okay, so this one, Eric, I don't have slides for it, but I have just a couple of things that I'm going to hold up and show.
Okay.
And hopefully that'll work out okay, because I thought it is more for children, so it's a different experience. And I didn't want for a children's story to be using slides.
Okay.
Okay. So this is a story that I wrote, and I've emailed it to friends that have young children, but I've never read it aloud to anyone before. So I am curious to get people's feedback, and I'm calling this story The Amazing Tale of Henry Peacock. And I wrote tail as Tail. Okay. And you can feel free to interrupt me if you'd like, because I'm going to be interrupting myself. And I think if I don't interrupt, it's about a 10-minute story. And the first paragraph includes a word that is not a word. It's kind of a made-up word, but it's the word farmher, Farmher. It's another good day word for Global International Women's Day, because if you picture a farmer, like me, I imagine you're probably picturing a man. This was a farmer who was a woman, and she called herself a farmher. So I like that word. Okay. Henry was a very lucky peacock. Ever since he was adopted by Paula, a kind farmer at Springdale Farms, it had been the best of times. You see, Paula loved animals with all her heart. If they were in need, she would think, there's room at the farm. I can take them in. I can give them a good home. So Paula lived on a farm with her goats and sheep and horses and donkeys and pigs and geese and ducks and peacocks. And they all lived together in a big family farm in a little town called Littleton. Now, that's all true. The town's name really is Littleton, and the peacock's name really is Henry, which is a great name for an animal. A lot of stories have animals named Henry. Um, and I guess that's one connection with what I told you about Thoreau. Well, to be told, Henry was a bit vain. He was convinced he was the most special, most beautiful animal on the farm. And why wouldn't he? His head was covered with the most spectacular shade of peacock blue feathers and topped with a blue feather crest. And This is a book that I found at our local library, and you can see just how magnificent the head of a peacock is. And Henry possessed a tail that was beyond compare. It was 2 feet long and glistened in iridescent shades of blue, green, and gold. His magnificent tail feathers had spots like big, beautiful eyes. Henry couldn't help but display his tail for all on the farm to admire. First, he raised his tail and opened it like a fan. Then he would shimmy and shake his tail feathers while he danced about in circles. Now, I have a friend who's the kind of friend if I ask, do you happen to have peacock feathers? I knew her answer would be, yes, and how many would you like? And when can I bring them over? So I was able to get some peacock feathers to show you. Now, these are a little bit old, but you can still see how beautiful they are. And if we have time at the end, I can tell you, but there's something really special about peacock tail feathers, which enables the peacock to shake his tail, but all of the eye spots stay fixed relative to each other. Okay, so back to the story. At night, Henry would fly up to his perch with his amazing 2-foot-long tail draped down. Someday my tail will be twice as long, he thought. Now, as time passed, Henry got a bit restless. It's a shame that only the animals here on the farm are able to see this magnificent tail, he mused. Well, one day, a flock of wild turkeys happened to pass by. They were rather round and quite plain with their dull brown feathers. Suddenly, Henry realized this was his opportunity to see the wide world. And more importantly, for the wide world to see him. So without so much as a glance back, Henry was off and running, and he had joined the flock. Now, I don't have a wild turkey feather because in the United States, it's illegal to possess feathers of wild birds. So there's lots of wild turkey flocks in this area. And even if I were to see a feather on the ground, I couldn't possess it. So I've got a picture of a turkey. At first, the turkeys ignored this strange-looking turkey. In fact, they felt rather sorry for him. He didn't have a bumpy red head. He didn't have a snood hanging over his beak. He didn't have a red and blue wattle hanging from his neck. And he was awfully scrawny looking. No matter, that explains why he didn't have a flock of his own. So here you can see the snood and the wattle and the brightly colored head of the turkey. Well, Henry was having the adventure of a lifetime, and he had even made a friend, a young turkey about his size, but much rounder and plumper, looked at him curiously. I'm Henry, said Henry proudly. What's your name? I don't have a name, the young turkey said. Well, what do they call you when it's time to be fed? Henry asked. Wild things don't have names, said the turkey, and we feed ourselves. His new friend showed Henry how turkeys forage. All around you are delicious tender green leaves, berries, roots, and shoots. The forest floor and meadow are full of delicious and nutritious things to eat. It's natural. All you have to do is scratch on the ground. Wild turkeys are similar to peacocks, thought Henry. They're just not as beautiful. Well, that night, as darkness fell, Henry followed the turkeys as they got a running start, flapped their wings, and flew up into the trees. I sleep on a perch, so I'm glad you nest at night, said Henry. Of course, said his friend, up in the trees is the safest place to be. Wild turkeys are very similar to peacocks, thought Henry, just not as beautiful. Henry loved being a member of the wild turkey flock. When the turkeys gobbled or squawked, Henry added his loud screech. Wild turkeys are just like peacocks, thought Henry, just not as beautiful. Sometimes the flock forage with other forest creatures. It's fun, and it's also safer, his friend explained. Wild turkeys are very brave and protective. Deer have an excellent sense of smell, and squirrels provide an extra set of eyes from on high. Well, over time, a funny thing happened. Henry stopped thinking about how beautiful he was and started to notice how beautiful the turkeys were. Their feathers weren't just plain brown. In the sunlight, they had a beautiful coppery sheen and glistened with shades of green and bronze. And when the big male turkey puffed out his feathers, spread his tail, and strutted about, Henry had to admire how magnificent he was. Well, that winter, Henry barely noticed when his tail feathers fell out. In fact, he didn't even miss them, since it was much easier to run through the forest without them. But when the snow melted into spring, Henry's tail grew back even longer and more beautiful than before. Now, back at Springdale Farms, Paula had never stopped thinking about Henry, and she wondered if she would ever see him again. But every now and then, there would be a sighting. Someone in Littleton would rub their eyes and say, "Was that just a peacock with a flock of wild turkeys?" So Paula had never given up hope. Well, one day Paula had an idea. She asked the local newspaper to write a story about Henry, the peacock that ran off with a flock of wild turkeys. The story said that Henry was greatly missed, and if anyone should see him, to please contact Paula at Springdale Farms. Well, one day, as Henry and his flock were foraging, he spied a large van parked at the edge of the road. The van door opened and a man came out and looked over at the flock. "Henry?" the man called. "Henry?" Henry hadn't heard anyone call him by his name in a very long time. Suddenly he felt all warm and tingly. And before the man had a chance to even close the van door, Henry had hopped in without so much as a glance back. Paula was dropping off hay for the goats when she saw a van driving up their road. "What's going on?" she thought. "I didn't call a plumber." Then the van stopped, the door opened, and out hopped Henry. Well, today Henry is back at Springdale Farms, living happily with his flock of peahens. His 4-foot-long tail, now twice as long, is covered with beautiful, shimmering eye spots. Henry is very proud to be a peacock and loves strutting about, displaying his tail feathers to the admiring peahens. He's happy to be back home and never thinks of leaving the farm again. But Henry has never forgotten his friend and what he learned on his adventure. Wild turkeys and peacocks are very similar, he thought, and we are each beautiful in our own way. Now, that's the story, and the facts of the story are literally true. When I went out to this farm right after COVID, and I was looking at the animals, and Paula came up and told me this story of the turkey that ran off with the peacocks, and the article in the local paper, and the plumbing van driving up to the farm, and Henry coming back. And I said to her, that is such a great story. To me, it has all the elements of a great story. And why don't you write it? And she said, no, no, why don't you write it? And I did. So I can't see anyone else, Eric. So I don't know if people have comments or something, but I want you to think a little bit about that second story and the sort of the themes of that story and maybe any connections you see, and then I'll tell you sort of what I thought.
Okay, someone has written cross-cultural engagement breeds deep appreciation, deep learning, and transformed attitudes about others and the self. What is the theme that you have in mind, Sandra?
Well, first of all, I saw the sort of there and back again, story of an adventure, someone who sets out, learns about another culture, um, and then returns home again, content but changed. And I sort of felt like when I went to India, at first I started noticing how things were different and thinking about things through the lens of the way I did things and how different things were. And then over time, I stopped thinking about this is how I do things and how I'm used to seeing the world, and sort of started seeing things through a new perspective. And when I came home, and I was very happy to be back home, but forever changed and with, I guess, a different appreciation because there are a lot of similarities and differences between turkeys and peacocks. And of course, the turkeys didn't look any different at the end of the story than they did at the beginning. It's just that he couldn't see that. He could only see in terms of himself and what he was used to. And maybe people that are used to being storytellers or are more used to looking at themes of stories. Of course, I told you I was a math teacher. So people might have more insight into some commonalities between the two stories.
Eileen has mentioned the parallel between the ice and the breeds of the two birds blending. Eileen, can you explain a little bit more about this?
Sure. Sandra, I loved your story. And the
Oh,
last
thank you.
we were in a Zoom room together, and it looks like you weathered the
Oh,
storm. The earlier section, you talked about the ice from Walden Pond being brought so many miles over so many months to India, and that water blended from the and within that distance that was covered. And then also your experience of the philosophers from the United States and then in India. I just saw that blending, those stories about blending things that seem unlikely, paralleled in your story about Henry and the
oh,
turkeys.
thank you.
It's
Well, I
beautiful.
will say, peacocks to me, when I went to India, I brought back just a very few things, and I I went to a market, and there was someone who was doing this picture of a peacock, which is one of the things that I brought back, and I have it hanging in my living room. And then when I was in Rajasthan, I got this tapestry that I don't know if you can see the peacock in the embroidery, but when I see peacocks, I always think of India. And I know that in this country, at least, when you say turkey, it's usually kind of a disparaging term because we're thinking of domestic turkeys. But wild turkeys are actually beautiful, magnificent animals. And Ben Franklin actually thought the turkey should be the national bird rather than the eagle. Um, and the word turkey, just like the is same root origin as the country of Turkey, a fierce warrior, like a fighter, that they're really magnificent birds. And it wasn't until I moved to New England that I ever saw a flock of wild turkeys. So Eric, you're going to have to read the chats to me, I think, because I don't see them.
I
Yes,
really enjoyed your description of the copper feathers of the turkeys shining or and glimmering in your story. That was the imagery was beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, they are quite beautiful.
okay, Laura has written funny twist on beauty. We know peacocks are beautiful, but this seems very real, that birds are simply birds and forage and sleep. They seem to mix easily. We can learn from our feathered friends.
Hmm. So one thing I'll say about that is when I wrote this story, even though it's a children's story, I did lots of research because I wanted everything to be correct. So when I talked about them foraging sometimes with deer and squirrels, I actually got a lot of insight and information. I didn't know turkeys roosted in trees and whatnot. But the other thing I learned is that's an actual thing with peacocks running off and joining flocks of wild turkeys because there's different parks where you'll see wild turkey, excuse me, where you'll see peacocks, and occasionally they do run off and join flocks of turkeys. So that's an actual that's an actual thing. And when I went to the library to get these children's books to show you the pictures, there were three books in a row. There was first this book on peacocks, then this book on turkeys, and then this book on peacocks. So whoever did the Dewey Decimal Code stuck the turkey right between two peacocks. So they do have quite a lot of similarities, even though if you look at their skin color or feather color, they initially look quite different. Very similar in habits. So, and that's why I thought that it was a story that needed to be told.
So the theme that you're developing here that's common to both the Mahatma Gandhi and Thoreau situation and the turkey and peacock situation, the theme is intercultural exchange, intercultural
I guess
communication.
so. I guess so. I mean, to me, I think of peacocks in India, and turkeys, of course, are American. So
Ah,
it was sort of an American and turkeys and how they are similar, but how they are different. So it's not an exact parallel, of course. It's not
mhm.
like Gandhi and Thoreau, but it was a way that I think the third strand of the second story is maybe the farmer Paula, or maybe it's the reader. But it was another story that to me related India and America.
Mhm. Rebecca has written about how the words for turkey and peacock In Spanish, those two words seem to be related.
Oh, hmm.
And when the Spanish explorers came to the Americas, they thought they had reached Asia, and so I guess they were expecting to see the peacocks of Asia, but instead they saw the turkeys of the Americas.
Interesting. I didn't know that. So part of the theme that I wanted to get on the workshop is I had never written stories before. I've never attended workshops. I've never done storytelling before. And yet, just sort of when I open myself up to new ideas, sometimes I get disparate things that kind of weave together in a certain way and is a story. And if you allow yourself to just sort of experience new things and think about how they relate to each other in different ways, that there's stories kind of in everything. So someday I think it would be nice if it was illustrated because when I just tell it, I see all kinds of images in my head, and maybe other people see different ones, but
Well, in my world, I equate peacocks with states and wild turkey. I
like,
don't associate peacocks with India. We had a doctor in our neighborhood who had peacocks that escaped into the woods with the wild turkeys. So I grew up with that. With
oh,
basically
really?
your was that was our neighborhood.
The peacocks and the turkeys. So when I heard that, when Paula told me that story, and that's a true story, like the way I told it is actually what happened, even down to the plumber's van. But the idea of a peacock running off to join wild turkeys, I thought was about the funniest thing I've ever heard. But apparently, from what I've read, that is a thing. Yeah. Thank you. And where are you living now?
I live in Missouri, and the
Yeah,
turkeys were in Kansas City. The turkeys and peacocks actually were in Kansas City.
yeah. I can say growing up in the Chicago suburbs, there were no
We had
wild
an
turkeys.
we had an eccentric doctor who liked to show off that he made a lot of money. So he had bought peacocks and they had gotten loose.
Yeah. And they're loud.
They're very loud, and there were lots of complaints to the police, and people thought people were being murdered in the woods.
Yeah.
You two behave.
Okay. Any other thoughts or comments, Eric?
Nope.
Okay. Well, I think then it's okay to leave a little bit early, right?
Sure.
Okay. So thank you again for hosting me, and it was just such an honor to be part of this storytelling festival, and for me to actually be telling this story for the first time. And you can feel free to send me feedback through Eric.
Nyana's just coming in now.
Oh, okay. So I'll wait and see if there's any other comments before I sign off.
Well, I thought it was an interesting question. If we can think of two prominent people who influenced each other, I think that requires some thought to really come up with something about that.
Yeah, and the reason I did that as a challenge is literally when I was reading that email and I said, "Oh, that's interesting, but I don't have anything for that." And I sort of got a challenge from my son that said, "Well, I bet if you think about it, you could." And it turns out like I had all of those three separate stories kind of inside of me, that learning Thoreau was influenced by the Bhagavad Gita. That was very profound to me. And that was that first connection that I felt. And then that moment at the museum in Delhi, being so far from home and seeing the replica of Thoreau's cabin and those books, that was very profound. And then sitting there at that talk and at the museum, learning about the very water harvested from Walden Pond being transported to India. I thought all three of those were profound to me personally, but it had never really occurred to me to put the three of them together in a story until I was kind of challenged to do so. And then it seemed to me that they belonged together and made a nice story. And the peacock thing, I think just when I heard that story, it was like, this is really funny and deserves to be told. And it has, I guess, a moral in it that isn't really hitting you over the head, but it's just sort of how we evolve to see a person or a people's differently once we have a familiarity with them and recognize our commonalities and can sort of embrace our differences.
There's a South Korean movie you need to look up and watch. It's called The Great Heist. It
Okay.
revolves around people stealing ice was a royal monopoly in Korea, and people were stealing the ice from the royal ice warehouses. You might enjoy it.
You know, there's a lot of great stories with ice, and the more I dug into that, it was just fascinating. And there was one story I remember that Queen Victoria got her ice from a specific pond in New England. It wasn't Walden Pond, I forget the name of it, but it was only from a specific pond. And she would only accept ice shipped from that pond. And of course, the amount of ice that was shipped from that pond far exceeded the amount of ice in that pond because, of course, she couldn't tell where it was coming from. But that was a pond in New England that was just for the Queen's ice. But of course, that wasn't the case at all. And there's another interesting thing about ice on the ponds in New England, in that when I lived in Vermont, I learned this, that people would sometimes put a scarecrow or something on the frozen pond, and then they would sort of bet what day the scarecrow would fall into the pond. In other words, what day the ice would melt. They called it Ice Out Day. And it turns out that we have from Walden Pond and other ponds throughout New England a history of the day that the pond melted. And this is really important because when you talk about climate change, and of course you could say, well, what do you mean global warming? This was a very cold winter where I live. If you have back to 1850, so you have over 150 years of data of saying, look at how late it used to take for the ice to melt at a pond compared to the time that the ice melts today. And yes, there are years that are a bit colder and years that are a bit warmer, but if you look at the overall trend, the ice out date of a pond tells a very compelling story. Now, I'm very fortunate where we live in New England that we also have from Great Blue Hill climate data. That's it's the oldest continuously operating meteorological station in the country. We have climate data going back to 1850. So those two things coupled together are really compelling. And I know when I taught statistics, I looked at that data, but that's another story to be told for another day.
Here in Chennai, we're on the coast facing eastward, facing Singapore and all. And there's a government building right next to the beach called the Ice House. And evidently that is the building that ice was taken into and stored back in the British days. And I always find it so amazing that the ice didn't melt in the process of being shipped here from a cold place. Evidently, ice, if it's packed properly, it stays frozen a long time.
Yeah, well,
As
it
I
would be, sorry, it would be in the hull of the ship, and I think they would pack sawdust around the end, so it kind of insulated it, and about half of it did melt. But if you have a thermal mass, and my friend who's a chemie would explain it much better than I can. But yeah, I guess they were willing to lose, you could lose half of it and still make a lot of money selling what you had. And of course, before refrigeration, this was really valuable. And the first refrigerators were called ice boxes, for
Well, I
those of us
think
old enough to remember.
in New York, even into the 20s and 30s, they had ice boxes, even though electricity was very common. My father, who passed away many years ago and was a boy, maybe 100 years ago in New York, he used to tell me about the iceman who would come and put ice in your refrigerator.
Uh-huh. In your ice box, that's right. And
Yeah,
even
yeah.
here where I live in the next town of Acton, there's uh, is it Icebox Pond, or there's remnants in the names of things that it's so easy to not think about it. What's the history of where that name come from? But right here there were ponds where they harvested them for ice.
we still had icemen in Missouri when I was a kid. And on the farm, we had an old ice box that you put blocks of ice in the top of it and let the cool go down,
Hmm. That made more sense than depending on electricity.
especially on the farm.
Hmm. Okay, well, this has been an interesting workshop on a number of related themes, including the mixture of things. Uh, does anyone want to say any final words before we hang up? Somebody from Florida has written, oh, I don't know, about a Greek wedding. Cheryl, if you want to say it, why don't you just turn on your microphone and say what you want to say and relate it to somehow to what we're talking about somehow.
I shall do so.
Hmm.
I'm a Florida lawyer. I'm not an intellectual. I'm not in education, but it was a lovely presentation. Thank you,
Thank
Sandra.
you.
Reminded me of the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Tula's father was angry that she was marrying a boring piece of toast American teacher. By the time the wedding came around, the father realized that their last name, Portokalos, was Greek for the fruit orange, and the groom's last name was Miller, which is derived
Oh,
from the Greek word for apple. And at the wedding, when her father was making a toast, he said, "So, in the end, we all fruit." So I think that that's maybe kind of a childish interpretation of your story, but it was a delightful story. Thank you.
yeah, thank you. Well, in the end, we are all fruit. I like that.
I used to do a program that I called Around the World in 80 Tales that was primarily animal tales because the same animal tales exist in every culture on the planet. The animals change depending on what the local animals are, but the stories don't. And I
Hmm.
used to have the kids try to guess what country where the animals came from. There are no real differences under the sun, other than the ones we make up in our own heads.
Yeah, well, I enjoyed sort of being able to get into the animals' heads. Like if I was a peacock running away with turkeys, how would I feel or what would I think? And um, it was just fun to do that, and probably be fun for kids to do that too. And what I learned participating in this adults reading children's literature is the things that we enjoyed as children, we often get away from as adults, but I still enjoy them. And I think that I never want to stop reading children's literature. And
We
you
draw
don't need
too
to.
many we draw too many limitations on what is children and what's adult. Now, years ago, I had somebody at a festival give me a Scottish story called The Woman Who Flummoxed the Fairies, which is considered a children's story. In my experience and my telling, kids don't like it. Adults love it. Kids don't like it. So we make too many definitions that divide things between adult and child, and sometimes we need to blur those more.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of what we call fairy tales weren't written for children. They're morals, right? They were meant to be told orally. They weren't meant to be read necessarily. Hmm.
Stop.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sandra.
Okay. Thank you.